Hello, I am Xarkun, and this is World of Warships Legends. Before we get into the details of today's battle, I want to make an observation, and I want to see if you agree with me. Let me know in the comments if you do, but the observation is this. It seems to me that lately, even more than usual, people are complaining about the game. Some of these complaints are complaints that I regard as legitimate and constructive, people identifying things that truly do need to be fixed in this game. Some of the complaints are just the typical gamer kind of frustration that a lot of people seem to experience when they're playing competitive online multiplayer video games. I am not one of those people. I think it's just a quirk of my chill personality, or perhaps it's aided and abetted by certain magical herbs. Who knows? In any case, there's a lot of negativity. I try to not contribute to that negativity in a negative way, let's say. I try to only criticize this game in areas where I think it can and should improve, and I try to make sure that my criticisms of the game are due to the game itself and not due to the way that I am engaging with the game, or else, in other words, playing it. A good tip for anybody to keep in mind. But I think another good thing could be done, and that is to look at this game during battles like this. This is a classic World of Warships Legends battle where both teams are clearly playing for the win, and the battle doesn't get decided until the final 10 seconds on the clock. It's a real nail-biter. And which way is it going to go? Well, you'll have to stick around and find out. But this game made me remember why I fell in love with World of Warships Legends, and why I still enjoy playing the game so much, even until this day, despite all of the problems that you could possibly point to. The Georgia is a fantastic ship to come to this realization in, because I think it's an underutilized battleship at Tier 7 that really does have a lot going for it, and nevertheless I don't see it sailing the high seas too often. But the Georgia has incredible punching power, as that King George goes down for our first kill. Before I took the Georgia out, I hadn't taken it out in a while, so when that happens, I like to refresh myself on the statistics of ships sometimes. So I was looking at the Georgia's stats page, and I was looking at its AP Alpha Strike, because the Georgia has 18-inch guns, 457mm guns. Not quite as big as the Yamato's guns, and they don't enjoy the same overmatch threshold of 32mm of armor. The Georgia can only overmatch 30mm of armor. Nevertheless, they are 18-inch guns, and they have an incredibly high alpha strike, especially when the commander skill gyrating drill bits is influencing the build. So the Georgia's alpha strike is over 17,000 with gyrating drill bits, and in order to get that number you do have to strike a citadel. But that number, 17,000, is even higher than the Yamato's alpha strike, also running gyrating drill bits. In fact, I think the Georgia may have the highest AP alpha strike in the entire game, which makes sense, given that it only has 6 guns, whereas the Yamato has 9, and you can see these guns absolutely ripping people apart. That alpha strike is going to show up in a very important way near the end of this battle, and you'll just have to sort of wait and see what I mean. In the meantime, we've got a ship in Alpha, we've got our destroyer approaching Bravo. We've lost 3 ships where the enemy has lost 2, so it's not necessarily off to a great start. We're going to try to get a cross-shot map on this Poltava. He's quite far away, but he's pushing into our range. The accuracy on that salvo leaves a little bit to be desired, but what are we doing now? Well, oftentimes I see people make this sort of mistake in a battleship where instantly, as soon as the game starts, they push in, and somehow they regard this as a good move. You'll note that only now, after the enemy has been thinned out on this side, am I pushing in. Pushing into a King George and a Brandenburg, a recipe for disaster. But after the King George has been taken out and the Brandenburg has been beaten into a pulp, there's no reason not to push in. An unexpected Alabama shows up, but he's giving a unhealthy amount of broadside quite far away, so we're going to line up a shot on him. There's a York inside of the Alpha Cap, and we are going to be careful about not going around the island and taking his torpedoes. The shot on the Alabama is out, the result is quite nice, and the Alabama is well on his way back to port. The idea here is that we're going to try to get around this side of the map and come around into a place where we can get crossfires on the enemy team. That is the goal here of the battleship. The only thing standing in our way from doing that is, of course, this Alabama, who isn't going to be standing in our way for too much longer, let's be real. With that salvo, he really shouldn't have much health left. In the meantime, the York has been dispatched. The destroyer on our team is taking Bravo, although it looks like the Poltava is pushing in, and there is an Ochakov out there. Now, the Ochakov is a ship that I find immensely irritating, not necessarily because I think it's overpowered. It does have excellent radar, of course, given that it's a Russian cruiser, and along with that radar, it has excellent shell ballistics, but it only has 8 guns, which I think does make it a little bit less effective in terms of overall damage dealing than some of the other Russian cruisers, and I know people out there are going to disagree with me, but I still stand by that statement. The thing that I find so frustrating about the Ochakov is that when you hit it with battleship caliber AP, you tend to get over-penetrations and not citadels. Keep that in mind, because it's going to become important later. But as of right now, this game has, well, I suppose maybe my analysis in the beginning that this was a competitive game where everybody is trying to win is not necessarily the case here. There are only 3 enemy ships left versus our 5. One of them is a Kagero right in front of me, who I did not really know was there. I mean, I knew there was a destroyer in the area because I was being spotted. But as soon as the Kagero shows up, we turn to port so that we make sure we're not going in the same direction we were traveling, and in that way we avoid his torpedoes. What we're trying to do now is sneak up on this Poltava and take him out. He's just around the other side of the island right here. The Kagero complicates things, but we do have the Georgia's engine boost running, and because we're going so fast, hopefully it will be a little bit more difficult for this enemy destroyer to line up torpedoes on us. Poltava is sitting right next to an island. I was hoping he didn't have his guns pointed this way, but he does, and he manages to chunk us pretty hard there, potentially even getting a citadel. I'm not entirely sure, but that's okay, because we were at full health when the engagement started, and we're able to overmatch his bow, if not citadel him in return. Doing so nets us the Confederate medal, and we are going to try to turn in here. We don't necessarily want to take another big meaty chunk from these Poltava guns. We do want to angle, and we still reserve the right to overmatch his bow armor here. What we don't want to do, of course, is ram him, so hopefully we can take him out with this shot. No, not quite. We are able to punch right through that armor, but we aren't quite able to send him to the bottom of the sea. Looks like he's slowing down, and he's going to begin to move forward. We're trying to get this drive-by done right. Can't quite do it. The Poltava is going to be able to... No, he's not going to be able to shoot us again. He is taken down. That just leaves the Ochakov and the Kagero. The cap situation is 2 caps to 2 caps. The Kagero is still running around somewhere, and the battleship in front of me has just exploded. So now it is 3 versus 2. This is still a winnable game for the enemy team, and it's situations like this where I think the more experienced and better players are separated from the sort of less experienced and worse players. And that's not to say that people who might make mistakes in the end of a battle are, bad people or anything. You just got to know when to bring it home. And you have to understand the weaknesses of battleships. One thing that I see people complain about all the time is high explosive spam and how overpowered or how dangerous it is for battleships. And yes, that's true. This Ochakov does have the ability to absolutely melt me. And if he stays at range, he's quite difficult for me to hit in return, which can be very frustrating. And it's things like this that lead people to say that, HE spam is a problem and it needs to be nerfed. That may be true, but to a large extent, you have a lot of control over how you deal with the HE spam. Notice that the Ochakov, the further he gets away from me, and the closer he approaches to the border of the map, the less of a threat he becomes. In fact, we barely lost any health in that engagement. Whereas, if we had pushed into the kiting Ochakov, it's likely we would have struggled to do much damage to him aside from the occasional overpen here and there, and he would have probably melted us and sunk us. That's one way to approach the problem of HE spam, which is to not approach it. Haha, you see what I did there? That was a frickin' clever pun. Give the video a like for it. But in all seriousness, HE spam is the most effective when you're pushing straight into it. With all the cruisers out there who can penetrate 32 millimeters of armor with their high explosive, it's a rough time for tier 7 or even legendary tier battleships. If you push into a cruiser, you might as well regard pushing straight into it the same way as you would regard pushing into a destroyer that is likely to launch torpedoes at you. The torpedoes take you out in one big, chunky, meaty alpha strike hit and potentially cause flooding, whereas the high explosive simply melts you with high explosive penetrations and causes fire. The way you avoid both is by refusing to push into both of them whenever possible. Sometimes you have no choice but to push in, but we absolutely had a choice. That Ochakov is so far away that he really doesn't matter for this battle right now. All that matters right now is the Kagero, and you can see that the enemy team is actually ahead of us on points. So it's important both that we protect our capture circles and that we avoid the torpedoes from the Kagero. We've managed to avoid his first set, and we notice the Ochakov is coming back as our friendly destroyer enters the Delta Cap. I believe that is a Summers, and he doesn't have a lot of health left, so it's probably a good idea for him to try to take the cap rather than try to find the Kagero, who is a lot healthier. And the Kagero could probably take down that Summers in the span of 1 or 2 salvos with his guns and still survive. So I like what the Summers is doing. Meanwhile, the Kagero is spotting both me and this friendly battleship for the Ochakov to lob HE at over the island. So we've got our guns pointed that way. We're going to try to kill this Ochakov, but we're also mindful of the Kagero's presence on this side of the map. And there, we score a citadel on the Ochakov, which allows our Nagato to take him out. And even though we were trying to be aware of the Kagero, well, he gets some very clutch torpedoes on us, honestly. I wasn't expecting those. Usually, when you sail around and zigzag and go at random versus Japanese destroyers, they have a hard time torpedoing you, but he lined up that torpedo salvo for me perfectly. Luckily, he didn't get it quite so on point with the friendly Nagato. So the friendly Nagato is still alive, and the destroyer has managed to flip Delta, although the Kagero has re-entered it. You can see the Summers is basically a one-shot kill for the Kagero, so he's doing exactly the right thing, and he's running away, as is the Nagato. He happens to run into the last remaining red cap and stop the enemy accrual of points. There's less than 30 seconds left to go in the game. It's 686 versus 697. Is that enough time to overtake the enemy on points? That's the question. But it's absolutely this kind of game, where originally I said everybody was being competitive, not necessarily, but the people at the end, where it counts, were being competitive. And my teammates, luckily, do exactly the right thing, following my citadel on the Ochakov, which was a clutch citadel that honestly allowed us to win this game. We overtake the enemy on points at the last possible moment, and we end with a glorious victory in the USS Georgia. This is the kind of game I like to play, the kind of game I like to show, and hopefully the kind of game you like watching. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.